This video is on anger management. Now, as you can see, it's listed in the spec that you are expected to be able to describe and evaluate in terms of strengths and weaknesses, including a study of cognitive behavioural treatment, and I've chosen anger management for this one. It's worth noting, though, that they're not going to state the name anger management in an exam question. They're going to say to you, describe or evaluate or assess the effectiveness of a cognitive behavioural treatment. So you need to remember that your cognitive treatment is anger management. Okay, so anger management focuses on people with aggressive behaviour that needs to be controlled. The difference here, though, is that it's not actually working necessarily on anger. They're accepting that anger is a normal, healthy response, but they're saying it's when anger develops into rage that it takes over the body. It has a physiological effect on the body that's not healthy and therefore puts strain on the body. Now, the anger can trigger these aggressive outbursts, which then leads to you harming someone else, and that's where we're linking this to crime all the way through. So certain offenders, depending on the nature of the crime, might be put on an anger management program because of either whatever's happened, be it something that happened as part of the crime or the type of crime that they committed, or because of their personal characteristics. Remember as well, nice little link here, that the choice of treatment will be decided by psychological formulation. So obviously psychological formulation will have taken place, and then, where they will have analysed the nature of the offence, their personal characteristics, and then from there they will have decided how to move forward with a treatment. So anger management in general uses strategies which identify whatever it is that's triggering the anger, and essentially they teach the offender strategies to help them control those triggers themselves. So again, linked to social control, this is about empowering individuals in order to be able to manage and treat their own symptoms. Proper dietary regimes are suggested as well, link obviously across to diet here, so if we're thinking a compare question, we've got a similarity there. But they also use relaxation techniques, and that's how essentially they're teaching this idea of controlling the triggers. Now, they will also teach them to learn to cope with different opinions from others, and that's a real focal point of the program, because a lot of the suggestion is that the anger will be triggered with other people, and obviously if the crime that's been involved has responded to some sort of offence on another person, so for example if it was a violent offence or somebody's caused grievous bodily harm on another person, they might have analysed that to say that the other person maybe said something that provoked the attack. Now, at the moment, they're focusing more on what triggers the outburst of the anger and the aggression, and how that trigger can lead to the thought processes and how they need to be changed. So the idea of somebody maybe saying an insult to you would act as the trigger. They would then work out why that insult gets such an effect from you. So what thought processes does that insult trigger within the person's mind, and then how that thought process can be changed in order really to enable the effectiveness of the trigger. Now, such anger is thought of as an inappropriate thought pattern and reactions rather than outbursts. So obviously it's a cognitive behavioural treatment here because of this idea of the thinking about your behaviour. It's that idea of trying to change the thought response that the trigger provokes within the mind. If we have a quick look at this, in terms of the stages of anger management, now again, if this is your 16 marker, I would be expecting for your AO1 for you to be talking about the stages of anger management. So the first stage within the cognitive preparation, that's where this unpicking takes place. That's where this idea of establishing what the triggers are, working out what the thought processes behind the triggers are, maybe what that links to. Has there been an event? Has there been something in childhood? Is there something linking with self-esteem? Where we'll unpick that idea really of what's happened. The skill acquisition on stage 2 is really that process of teaching the relaxation techniques. So it might be this idea of counting to 10 and being able to count to 10, giving you that opportunity to calm down. It might be teaching you breathing techniques, and these also might be paired with different types of relaxation drugs as well to almost help you at this stage. The third stage then is the application and the practice. Now this is where things like the role play is absolutely vital, because what will happen is during this stage they will give the offender the opportunity to put into place that skill acquisition. So for example, they might create a situation where an insult is told to the offender and they're purposely provoked. And then it's that opportunity then for the offender to practice that response to the insult by using their relaxation techniques to not respond to the trigger. Now, the practicalities of this is quite important as well if you start thinking about the evaluation here. For anger management to be effective, we're talking really twice weekly group meetings for an hour each session. Now, the positives here, obviously, if we can do this within a group, it might make it a little bit more cost effective. But don't forget with all of this that you need a trained practitioner to run the group. Now, this might be someone within the prison themselves, or it might also be somebody that they have to pay to get in. The treatment will start itself with group work focusing on social skills such as listening. Discussions will work up to talking about individual triggers, and then they must end with positive thoughts about the process itself. Now, if we start thinking about evidence to support the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of anger management as a treatment, Keane in 2000 used a program with a group of offenders, young offenders aged 17 to 21. Now, they did 8 two-hour sessions delivered over 3 weeks, and the final session was a month later. Don't worry about that, though. You don't need to know that or be able to quote that in an exam if you're just using this as evidence to support. Keane found that the participants felt that they had better awareness of their anger management difficulties and had improved their ability to control their anger after the course. So Keane obviously here is a good piece of evidence arguing the effectiveness of anger management within young offenders here. Now, Hunter also reported considerable reduction in impulsiveness and interpersonal problems following an anger management program. Now, we know that to develop the AO3 across your essays, we need to be putting in these howevers. We need to be able to kind of extend or develop the AO3 to have a counter argument in. Now, I suggest that you use law. Now, law found that only one individual who completed an 8-session course, actually showed any improvement. And they're arguing that just because an individual feels that they're able to control their anger doesn't actually mean that that's going to be able to be applied within their reduction of aggression. So, for example, they may feel like they're more in control, but that doesn't actually mean when a situation occurs that they are actually in more control. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the two will go together in terms of reducing aggression. So law is really questioning the application of this therapy into the real world. I've put a couple of possibilities on the screen here for exam questions. Feel free to pause and have a go at these. If you just have a look though, the compare for 8 marks I think is quite unlikely, but I do think it's quite possible that you might have maybe up to 6 marks where you're comparing the similarities and differences across the biological and the cognitive treatment. Equally, again, if you're going to get a 16 marker, we're going to be either discussing the effectiveness or assessing the use of these treatments. And don't forget that the spec specified at the beginning that you need to be able to refer to studies throughout these. Just very quickly, I can't find a question where it's been on the new spec yet, but on the old spec, obviously describe and evaluate now would be replaced with an assess, but you can see here that on the essay question of the old spec they were using the 2 treatments together, and that's very possible for your 16 marker that actually you're being asked to kind of compare the effectiveness across the 2 treatments, very possibly linked to an AO2 situation. So you might have, Tommy's just committed a crime, it'll give you a little bit of information about Tommy's crime, and it might say, the prison warden thinks that Tommy should have anger management and somebody else thinks that Tommy should have a biological treatment, and what do you think? And you can argue that one out. In terms of the AO1 that's accepted though for anger management, you can see here things like offenders being helped to identify triggers, thought patterns being identified, alternative thinking, relaxation and coping techniques being taught, and this idea of role play, practicing the new skills. And very quickly you can see that the evaluation points are very heavy on evidence, so they want this idea of being able to refer to the effectiveness of these treatments across evidence.